All right, so what you're going to do is you're going to trace around the edge of the wing, and you're going to add a little extra for what's called seam allowance, and then you have to flip it over. Okay, now again, you're on the back of the fabric, okay? Whatever the nicer side is, that's the side that's away from where you're drawing. And again, you got to leave a little room for the seam allowance. So you trace around it, trace around it, trace around it, trace around it. And then when you're done, you take the wing away and you're going to add a seam allowance. So let me add a little bit of here, maybe about 1/2 inch. A little bit here. Wherever there's a bend, you can leave a little gap. So here, 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 and there you go. And when you cut it out, you're going to cut along the outside edge, okay, of the seam allowance. The inside line is where you're going to sew, but the outside line is where you're going to cut. And again, you have to put the wing here and then flip it, but you have to do all this on the back of your fabric. And then you cut it out. Okay, so when you cut it out, the part of the scissors you want to use is the part nearest the hinge. That's the part that's going to be have the most force. So you open the scissors all the way so you're near the hinge, and you cut around the seam allowance, not the lines of the wing. Okay, the seam allowance is always going to be slightly bigger than the shape you're cutting. You need that seam allowance because that's the part that makes sure that your sewing doesn't come apart. So it's very important. And you see how I put these little, wherever there was a corner, I indented the seam allowance so that it folds easily. Okay, so remember, you're sewing the whole thing inside out so that when you're done sewing, you can flip it. Make sure after you trace the pattern, you add the seam allowance so that you don't mess up your bird wing. Okay, and everywhere there's a large turn, you're gonna cut a little angle out of it so you've got separate things. So what you're gonna do is, like right here, you know that there's a little dent, you know there's a little indentation, you make a little cut right up to the edge of the seam. So that's how it's gonna look. And remember, you're going to be joining the two pieces along the seam line, and then you're going to be turning it inside out. So now I'm going to cut the other half the same way, but I don't need to videotape that. Now this is polyester batting. You just need a single ply, and it's for the wing, so that the wing can have a little bit of quilting to it. You go as close to the edge as possible. And for the polyester batting, you do not need a seam allowance. And because it's going to be on the inside, it is okay to trace it with a Sharpie. The fabric you're going to want to trace with a piece of chalk, but for the batting, you just need a Sharpie. That's fine. And you do not need a seam allowance. And now I'm going to cut this out. All right, now remember, we're going to be sewing this inside out. So that means that the side that's going to be on the inside ultimately is the side that's going to be showing right now, because we're going to be turning it inside out later. I've taken this polyester batting, which is the stuff that you put inside quilts, just one ply of it, and I've glued it down to one of the wings. Now, you can't use Elmer's glue. You have to use Aleene's tacky glue or some sort of fabric glue. And you don't want to use a lot, maybe like a couple of dots here and there. I happen to not have any Aleene's tacky glue at home. Elmer's glue will not work. It'll ruin it. So I just, in a pinch, use these glue dots. I just used a few just to secure it in place temporarily until it's sewn in place. And what I'm going to do is, this is inside out, so this will be turned the other way later. I'm going to sew every edge except this one, because this is the edge that I'm going to turn inside out. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to line it up. I'm going to line up the two pieces, and I'm going to pin them together outside the line that I'm going to be cutting on. So I'm actually going to use the seam allowance for pinning. Now when you pin, you poke it in and then you poke it out again. So you see both the head of the pin and the point of the pin. So I'm going to just go around the edge and do that. Okay, so the amount of thread that you need is, if you take the thread and you put it between your two hands, and you spread your arms as far as they are, as they can go apart, that is the expanse of thread that you need. So if you're a larger person, you can get a longer piece of thread. If you're a smaller person, you get a smaller piece of thread. And the reason why we do that is we don't want the thread to tangle as we're sewing now any longer, and it'll tangle easily. Now the type of needles you want are sharps, and you want a fairly long needle. I like these quilting needles because they're long and they're very sharp, and they can go through several layers of fabric easily. So I'm just gonna take one out. I'm gonna pick this one. Okay, and the trick with threading a needle is, when you cut the thread, don't try and snap the thread, because it'll fray at the end. And the other thing is, don't lick your fingers and sharpen the end of the thread. I know that a lot of people's grandmas used to do that, but ew, first of all, germs. But second of all, it actually makes the fibers of the thread swell up, and it's harder to thread it. So what you're going to do is you look through the needle. So you have it facing away from you so you can actually see through it, and then you just push the thread through. A lot of people have trouble threading needles because they're doing it from left to right and they can't see through the eye of the needle. Anyway, you take the end of the thread and you pull it until you get to the other end of the thread. So you have these two thread ends and you put them together. And I like to use a nice thick button thread because it's nice and strong. And you just put the two ends together. And what you're going to do is you're going to wrap them loosely about 3 or 4 times around your pointer finger. Don't wrap them super tight, okay? So again, I'll do this. 1, 2, 3, 4. They should be loose enough that you can roll the thread back and forth with your thumb and pointer. Okay, so there you go. And then you roll it back and forth until it's very twisted. And then you go back up here and you pull it tight, and it will form a knot, a nice big knot. There you go. Okay. If you want to cut a little bit of the extra off, you can, that's fine. But you will have a nice big knot at the end. Okay, and this works much better than trying to tie a knot. Okay, so now, what we're going to do is we're going to start here and we're going to end here. We're not going to sew along here at all because that's how we're going to turn it inside out. And the trick is you're going to sew right on the chalk line. So your oh, let's do it this way. So your pins should be outside of that chalk line because you're not going to leave the pins in. The pins will come out later. So you just go up and down, up and down, up and down, and you can take the pins out one at a time as you're sewing. So just up and down without pulling it all the way through. You're going along the edge of the chalk line, and then as you go, you pull out the pins one at a time and you stick them in a pin cushion. Okay, so I'm just going to go along here, up and down, without pulling the thread through, okay? So you'll be able to see the eye of the needle and the point of the needle through a lot of fabric. All right, we're just going to take this thread pin out, and we're going to just keep going up and down. Now, when you've run out of space, you need to pull it through, and you might find that it hurts your finger to push it this way. So I suggest kind of taking the eye of the needle and pushing it on your table just to get it all the way through. Okay, and it should come through easily. And when it does, you just you can push it again with the table. I don't usually buy thimbles for my students. You could use a thimble, but I don't usually buy them for my students. So anyway, pull it through until it gets stopped by the knot. And then flatten it out. So you have this pretty nice, even seam of stitches. Okay, so again, down, up, right along the line, down, up, right along the line, down, up, right along the line, and then every once in a while you just pull it through. If you get a big loop like that, you may need to pull the ends so that it goes all the way through. And I personally like to go back in between my stitches. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the end. And then I'm going to go back in between my stitches. So what I do is I poke the needle up at the end of the previous stitch and then poke it down at the beginning of the next stitch. So I'm essentially going in between each stitch, and this will give you a solid line of running stitches so that you'll have this very neat, even line. Okay, and then when you run out of room, push it through using the table and then pull it through. And then once it's pulled through, very important that you flatten it out. It has to be flat. It can't be bunched. Okay, so when you have about this much thread left, you have a few more stitches left, but you're running out of room. So I'm just going to get in my last few stitches, and then I'll show you how to end the thread. If you have a loop like that, you got to go. There you go. All right, now I've run out of thread. I don't have a lot left. It looks like a lot, but it really isn't. And now I have to do something called a chain stitch. So let me just get my last couple of stitches in. And I'm almost back to the beginning again. And now I'm going to make my chain stitch. So chain stitch is basically you just make a stitch in place, you poke it up through the fabric, and you start to pull it tight. But before you get it all the way tight, you go through the loop. So you go through the loop and then you pull it the rest of the way tight. And just that act of going through the loop is enough. That is a chain stitch, and a chain stitch is basically a knot. So once you make that chain stitch, you may snip the thread and it will not come out. All right, so I'm gonna now do the same, see the solid line of stitches that I have? I'm gonna do the same solid line of stitches here and then back again on this side, but I don't need to videotape it because you already see how to do it. I'm gonna pull it all the way through. Oop. Make sure it's not bunched up. Flatten it out. Okay, so I've gone all the way. I've got this nice solid line of stitches. And now I have to make my chain stitch. So again, just a stitch in place through the fabric, pop it up again. But you see this loop? You got to go through it before you pull it all the way through. So I'm going to just pull it a little bit, and then I'm going to go through the loop. Pull it nice and tight, and then I can snip the thread with no fear of it coming out. Now, here's where the magic is. I'm going to take my wing and I'm going to turn it inside out. So I'm going to go to the very bottom where the end of the wing is. I'm going to push that through. And there is my wing. Okay, so what I might need to do is I might need to use not the point, but the eraser end of a pencil. I'm going to push it inside here just to make sure I have the end of the wing. Okay, so now I've got the end of the wing, and now it's nice and quilted because it's got the padding on the inside from the back. So here's what we have so far. This is the tail. These are the wings. And I haven't made the body yet, so the body is still just the pattern. The stomach is going to be blue, and these top sides are going to be yellow. I'm going to applique these yellow feathers on the wings, and I'm going to use a running stitch to make an embroidery of feathers on the tail feathers. So let me start with the tail feathers first. First of all, I'm going to go inside here with my needle because, and you can see there's batting in here to make it nice and unquilted. I'm going to go inside here with the needle because I don't want the knot to show. So the knot is going to be safely hidden on the inside. It's not very attractive, so I don't want anyone to see it. And then I'm going to start making these running stitches. So I'm going to go right through the quilting, all the way through to the other side, and I'm just going to do the same running stitch that I've been doing through the fabric, and I'll just use my table as a thimble to push through my thread. So this stitching is not practical, it's purely decorative. Just make sure that if you have a snarl or a loop that you pull it through. And I'm just going to make a nice line of running stitches through the quilting. Make sure you use a nice sharp needle, and then I'm going to go right back in between my stitches so that I have a decorative line of stitches. So I just go to the end of the stitch and then to the beginning of the next stitch, push it through using the table to help me. So I'll just speed through this part now that you understand the process. I'm going to just skip through and speed up the video for this part. Now, I want to go across here and back because I want to have a little line of stitches across the bottom. So I'm going to just do that now. The stitches so I get that nice solid line. And again, you could use any color thread. I just happen to only have white today. Here. And at this point, I am running out of thread. So before I mess up and go too far, I am going to make my chain stitch and I'll get a new piece of thread. Okay, very nice and decorative. I just need one more row of stitches here. If you want to, you can cut the extra loops off as long as you leave the knot. Okay, there's my knot. Now, I have to hide my knot. I could go up here and start here, but instead I'm going to show you how to just go in through the seam here. So I'm going to just go in between here, and the knot will just be hidden in the seam between the two pieces of fabric. I'll just tuck it in there. Nobody's to know it's there, and then I can make my last line of stitches. All nice and embroidered. And this is how it looks from the back. A stitch or two in the back. Let's see how it looks. Oh, nice and decorative here. Nice and decorative here. I think this is very pretty. And now I'm going to make my chain stitch and end it, and that's basically my embroidering for the tail. Over here, and I think I'll go around here. All right, so now I've got another nice kind of line here. A decorative line, so it's like got this nice embroidery to it. The back looks fine. I'm liking that. Thread left, you can do it. Okay, and there's my tail feathers. That's how it would look if you were looking up at the bird from the ground, and if you're looking down at the bird, this is how it would look. Okay, that's the tail. And now we're gonna do some, and you're gonna find this a lot easier. This is the applique. Feathers, and I pin them to the wing just to give a pattern. And if you are looking at the bird from above, this is what you'd see. And you do not want to have your knot show, so you go from underneath in between. Okay. And poke it up. Remove the pin. Let's get this hidden underneath. Bye-bye knot. We can't see you anymore. You are invisible. Okay. So, for this stitching, we are going to not go through to the back. We're just going to pierce the first level of fabric, and we're going to use the invisible stitch, which is you basically make your needle go in right where it came out. Okay. So it's not going through the back at all. All right, so an invisible stitch means that it's a tiny little stitch in the front and a larger stitch inside where no one can see it. So there's my tiny little stitch in the front. Let me just take out this pin. There we go. So tiny little stitch here. And you go inside the pillow and not through the back. And you poke it out here. So you don't see the stitch because it's invisible. It goes underneath. Oop, invisible stitch. Okay. You flatten it out, go right in where it came out, just about where it came out, and you poke it up into the next feather. And you're going to continue doing that so that all the visible stitching is hidden on the inside. Okay, let's talk about pin cushions. We don't want our pins going all over the place, so let's make sure that we put them away where they live. And you can see this nice invisible stitching. And I'm going to continue along here and then do the other wing. We don't need to videotape that. So I'm just going back through here to put a second stitch in some of the feathers, just to give them a little bit more of a secure hold, and also because I think it'll look a little better. So again, the bulk of my stitching is hidden underneath. This is called the invisible stitch. You just kind of pop through here, and any distance you cover is hidden underneath.